Kumar. We talked about the problems with infrastructure and other things that restrain our manufacturing. I think Mr. Stewart also rightly said that if we could integrate our services knowledge, our information technology knowledge into manufacturing, it would accelerate manufacturing growth. My question is our very antiquated indirect tax system in the country coming in the way of consumption growth and therefore manufacturing growth in the country? And do you think a comprehensive reform of the indirect tax system in the country could aid manufacturing growth very substantially?
Yeah, I mean, very clearly, I think the answer to that would be yes. I think that there is a cascading impact that indirect taxes have, and I think that the faster that we can get on with the implementation of VAT, the simpler things would become for us, and it would help to unclog a lot of problems that we face in manufacturing because of indirect taxes. So clearly, yes.
Good morning, Mr. Birla. I'm Nitin Sarin from Bangalore. Sir, I want to know, basically there are three types of manufacturings. One is you innovate a product, like what Mr. Ratan Tata is doing by making a 1 lakh rupees car. Second is you are adopting the same technology by making a new same product. And third type of manufacturing is you assembles, like what IBM does, a chip from Intel, a pad from Toshiba. So where does India stand in this type of manufacturing? And my second question is, sir, with the impose of FTA agreement with Thailand, do companies will come to India for manufacturing? Because if you see, Sony has shifted their plant to Thailand because of the cost advantage, and they have closed their operations in Haryana.
Yeah, well, I think that as I understand, there are two types of manufacturing that Indian companies can look at. One is becoming part of a value chain of a much larger manufacturer who's an international player and creating dependency for your product. And the other is, of course, to go it alone, like say, for example, we've done in our metals business. So those, I think, would be the two broad directions that manufacturing could take. On FTAs, I think that we should sign FTAs with a lot of caution. For example, we've had a lot of, I'm citing my example because, our example, because I know that the best. We've had a lot of problems with copper coming in on account of an FTA with Sri Lanka, which really is not legitimate. On the Thailand issue, I think that if we have FTAs with a country like Thailand, we operate in Thailand, and Thailand has the concept of a board of investment, which works in essence as a one-stop shop for all clearances. And I don't think that we can match their speed, given the kind of the kind of speed that we move at as of now. And unless things improve, I think we'll be in trouble. So unless we have some very specific competitive advantage, I think signing FTAs should be done with a lot of caution.
My name is Raghu Modi from Calcutta. A question for Mr. Birla. If one can survive in India and make manufacturing and money with your global experience, don't you think the whole world is a paradise compared to the problems we have here?
Yeah, well, I think that is true. I think that if you can survive as a manufacturer in India, then you would have a much better chance that to make it overseas. But I think that having said that, like Tom was saying, we have a history of entrepreneurship that goes back more than 150 years, something that China doesn't have. And I think that there's that huge advantage of the entrepreneurial mindset and the entrepreneurial spirit that India has and that we ought to be capitalizing on.
Can I request somebody who has a question for Tom? We've got to make him sing for his supper or sing for his tea break or whatever. Jasu? Yes.
My name is Jasu Shah. I'm from Mumbai. First of all, Mr. Stewart, I want to say what a profound speech you made, and we want to thank you very much. You mentioned about a very famous guru of Indian origin, Sikh Prahlad. And since 1992, he has been a regular visitor to India, and his message of core competence, building Indian multinationals, etc., are well known and were adhered to. I think what you are talking of is manufacturing 2.0 version. In the sense, you know, in IT, this is a common thing that Windows version 1 to 3, etc. I think we would like to hear from you that how do you see, I mean, there is a core competence, and this has helped many companies find better solutions than what they were doing. And now you are saying, start manufacturing version 2.0. Can you please elaborate?
Thank you very much for your question. And one of the things I've noticed in this country, this conclave, is that when somebody begins with a compliment, it means he's going to come up with a hard question after it. But that is a fundamental and important question. You remember, I think, from in CK's work, CK starts talking about the fortune at the bottom of the pyramid, but does not say that you should continue to live at the bottom of the pyramid. He suggests that the bottom of the pyramid is the base from which versions 2.0 or if it's a step pyramid, we might call it step, the step 2 and step 3 as you move up to the top of that pyramid. This also comes to the question about free trade agreements that was asked a little bit earlier. Commoditized manufacturing, commoditized anything, will compete on price. And if it competes, and it can compete on price because it is commoditized, it can move. I mean, that's the whole point of a commodity. Unless it's a physical commodity that depends on being close to the iron mine or close to the marble quarry or close to some particular natural resource, commodities move to wherever it is cheapest. And the point is to develop and to build around something that begins wherever it begins, that begins around a core competence or begins around some kind of advantage like inexpensive labor. The point is to find ways to move up the steps, move up the value-added scale to things that become unique, to things that become hard to duplicate by somebody else. The point of strategic and competitive advantage is that induplicability. It's that unique combination of assets. There's very few single assets that give you comparative advantage. Comparative advantage comes from combining assets into a set of activities that nobody else can duplicate. And that's the real opportunity. That's why I suggest that particularly at the high end of India's manufacturing opportunity, the opportunity comes from the combination of IT services and manufacturing. Medical equipment would be a particularly good example. Embedded software in automotive parts would be another example. It's in these areas where you can combine things that very few other people can put together in the same way. That's the way to move up the pyramid, and that's the way to create not only companies but clusters and industries that are advantaged not just locally but on a global basis, where people come not because it's cheap but because it's the best, which is really what you want.
My constituency is a rural constituency. Both of you, both Mr. Birla and you, very fleetingly talked about agriculture, the agrarian policy, the unskilled labor, the semi-skilled labor. If 75% of India today is rural, in my second term as a legislator, I am still wrestling with the thought of how to be able to harness this non-skilled and semi-skilled labor to the industries and the industrial leaders here. The framework you talked about, is there a framework that we are using in which we are harnessing the government policy the right way? Is our agrarian policy the right policy? As we are people living here, we may be having single channel vision. Therefore, I would like to address you, that since you fleetingly addressed it, could you, in a few minutes, just let me know what we are doing wrong or what we should be doing in the right direction to be able to harness the rural areas and the rural labor to make this a global manufacturing hub. Thank you.
Thank you for a very good question, half of which I'm going to evade. The half I'm going to evade is what you're doing now. I don't know. You know much more about this than I know, and anything that I say will be speculative or informed on the basis of having seen 3 articles somewhere. So the specifics of policy are I'm going to take this as a question about frameworks, so that you can develop the specifics, because if all business is local, that is more true of agriculture than anything else, perhaps the most local of all businesses. A few years ago, an American presidential candidate who lost very badly, a Democratic candidate, I think it was Walter Mondale, was in North Dakota, an area where wheat is grown. And he was wondering why people were growing wheat and why farmers growing wheat in North Dakota were having a hard time making a living. And they were having a hard time making a living because they were competing with Argentinian farmers growing the same wheat at Argentinian wages. And he suggested, why don't you grow Belgian endive or other specialty vegetables? He was laughed out of the state of North Dakota, but from an economic point of view, he was right. The point is that to improve a rural economy, the first thing is you've got to feed yourself. India now can feed itself. As Indian agriculture mechanizes, it will become possible for India to feed itself with fewer people. The question then is, what is the opportunity moving up the value-added scale with, first of all, the planting of specialty crops that are of a higher value than simply commodity crops, because the commodity crops, you're getting more yield, more tons per acre or tons per hectare. The second is in the development of food processing, which relates then to the industrial opportunity in what's called the cold chain, which is getting fresh food from farm to market. So I think there's a real opportunity in the industry, in number one, in putting more value added in rural areas, so that you increase, in the selection of crops and also in sort of manufacturing of specialty crops and also in the production in food processing. You have an opportunity to get higher wages because you're doing more highly valued, more high-value activities on the farms. That would simply be the framework I would propose. I have no idea how neatly it would map onto the Indian situation. I leave that to you and the people around you, who I'm sure know a great deal more about it than I do.
Kumar, would you like to add to that? Yasho had, in fact, addressed it to Tom first, but to both of you.
No, I think I completely agree with Tom's view about the cold chain and food processing. And I think if you look at India, if you look at China, they've brought in very large foreign investment in both retail and wholesale in the rural segment, which has actually helped to link up rural supply with urban demand. But obviously, we've got to come out with a solution which works best for us.
Indian rice, basmati rice, has brand value in the United States, which is interesting. I mean, Indian rice commands a brand premium in specialty markets in the United States. That, I suggest, is also an opportunity for you.